there. Welcome to the Thursday, July the 23rd edition of Needlepoint TV. I'm Ellen Johnson. I'm your host, and I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. I'm the owner of Serendipity Needleworks and the founder of the Stitchers Club, and this afternoon we're going to talk a little bit about choosing stitches for a canvas. This week's blog post over on the Serendipity Needleworks website is about choosing stitches for an ornament that I stitched a while back, a couple of years ago, I guess. Anyway, one of the main things that I want to make sure that we cover is to help you understand that you really don't need to just willy-nilly start stitching a canvas if you do plan to choose a variety of different stitches and threads for your project, because there does need to be, excuse me, a master plan in place so that you can be sure that everything you choose is going to work well together and help you to actually create that one-of-a-kind hand-stitched treasure that you see in your mind's eye. So before we dive into that, I would love to hear where you're watching from, so please type into the comments box and let me know. And if you're watching this as a recording, please do that as well, because it's always fun for me to see who's with me and where you are watching from. And I would love to get some thumbs up or some hearts just to let me know that the technology is working like it's supposed to. So, all right. Okay, so good. It's good to see everybody, and I see some thumbs up going. So perfect. We will go ahead and dive in. So this week on the Serendipity Needleworks website, which is serendipityneedleworks.com, there is a post that's all about choosing decorative stitches and threads for a needlepoint project. And for those of you who are relatively new to needlepoint, or if you've been stitching for a while but you've not really chosen stitches and threads for your projects before, this is a really good place to start. So I'm going to just really quickly share that blog post with you and let you take a peek at it, and I'll give you the overview of what we're going to talk about here for the next few minutes. So let's see, let me hop over and share my screen so you can see that. And that would not be what I wanted to do. Here we go. Okay, so now you should be able to see the Serendipity Needleworks website, and that's the ornament that I'm talking about. This ornament is one that I got Kathy Shinkle to design for my brick and mortar store. And for those of you that are not familiar with Tuscaloosa, Tuscaloosa is actually the hometown of the University of Alabama. And that tower in the background is called Denny Chimes. There's a bell tower on the University of Alabama campus, and it's I think it's every 15 minutes it chimes. They have and so it's basically a clock, and it's the center, the focal point of the quadrangle, or the quad as people around here call it. And so Kathy included that, and then Tuscaloosa is also on the banks of the Black Warrior River. So that is a little riverboat that you can see. We have one in town called the Bama Bell, and that's a representation of the Bama Bell there. So on this design, you can see that there are a variety of different things that you would have to stitch, and each one of those is called a design component. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So it is, you can see that there are several things there. One would be the word Tuscaloosa, obviously. Another design component would be the bell tower. Then under the bell tower and Tuscaloosa, you have what looks like a bunch of trees, and then you have the river, and you have the river boat, and then you have, coming forward, you see that we have a river walk here in Tuscaloosa, and that's what that represents. So we have the wrought iron gate, or I guess that's really a fence, and then the light post and the sidewalk and the grassy area. And you can't forget the sky. The background behind the Denny Chimes and the word Tuscaloosa, the sky, is also a design component. So you would consider your background a design component as well. So that's the first step that you would want to do when you're beginning to think about different stitches and threads for a project. And, you know, that's actually the very first thing that I do when I sit down with a canvas. For example, I've got this little guy here. So this is, and I'll put a piece of paper behind him so he's easier to see. This is my little Mardi Gras Santa that I got on a trip to New Orleans a few years ago. And let me get this camera bigger so I can see. There we go. So you can see on my Mardi Gras Santa that I have, use this to point with. I have, well, of course, there's Santa himself, and then he's holding a staff, and then he's got his mask. But on Santa himself, there are other, when you break Santa down, I guess you'd say, there are different things on Santa that you're going to have to, if you're going to use decorative stitches and threads, that you're going to have to identify, and you're going to have to figure out which stitches and which threads are going to work best on this design so that they all play well together to create a cohesive look. So you may be, I don't know, maybe you read my series of articles last year. Actually, I think it finished up earlier this year in Needlepoint Now magazine. I did a series of articles called Stitching with Confidence, and it's a column, an ongoing column now about some other ways to develop your confidence and to choose different stitches and use them on your projects. But the first 6 articles that I wrote were all about looking at canvases and using different elements of art and principles of design. When you look at this canvas, this is actually an artist's painting, but it just happens to be done on a piece of needlepoint canvas. Same thing is true for this. This is actually a Carol Dupree Santa, for those of you that are interested. This is a Rebecca Wood. Let me get that piece of paper again. It's easier to see if I put that behind it. So this is a Rebecca Wood Easter egg, and it's got the little sheep, you know. And so if I were identifying the design components on this particular canvas, you would, of course, have the bow and the sky behind the sheep itself. There are a couple of little flowers on here, the grass. Then there are actually some little bitty dots that you may, yeah, I think you can probably see those little bitty dots that are also little bitty flowers, and the grass. So all of those things are considered design components. And what you would need to do is make a list of those individual design components. And the next step would be to think about what those things would look like in real life. So in other words, what does a sheep look like in real life? Is it fuzzy? Is it sleek? Is it, I'm trying to think, well, furry? Is it curly? Is it straight? All of those different kinds of things, different descriptive words. Make a list of descriptive words beside each design component that you've listed out on your sheet of paper. And once you've come up with that, that's when you can start diving into your stitch books and into your stash as well, and begin to pull out some different options, different choices that you might consider before you actually begin to get your formal stitch guide pulled together. So this is kind of the brainstorming section or segment of writing a stitch guide. And I know there are lots of people who will get a canvas and they say, okay, I'm going to use decorative stitches. I'm guilty of this. I did this when I first started doing needlepoint and embellishing my canvases with decorative stitches and threads and all that kind of fun stuff. I just picked up a canvas and said, okay, let's see what'll fit here, and stitch, and then, okay, let's see what'll fit here. And I just ended up with a mishmash of stitches that didn't necessarily go well together or work well together to create a cohesive piece of fiber art when I was finished. If I had known about the elements of art and principles of design and how those relate to a needlepoint canvas, just like they relate to a painting on the wall, I would have had better success, basically, is the bottom line. So that's why when you're beginning this process, you're not doing anything wrong if you aren't familiar with this concept. If you've sat down and said, okay, I have this cute canvas. Let's look at another one. I have this cute canvas. I love this canvas. This is an Alice Peterson design. And this cute let me see if I can get it there. Wait, get the wrong. Okay, there we go. I love this Christmas tree canvas. And all of these trees are different. And there would be so many fun things that I could do with all of these trees. But the worst mistake that I could make, knowing now what I didn't know then, is to just helter-skelter, pull some thread, and then get a stitch book and decide, oh, I think I'll do this here, and then jump over here and do something completely unrelated way down over there, and just keep on doing that. Because what would happen 9 times out of 10 is that I would end up with a collection of stitches that won't probably work well together. And there are different things that you need to know in order to be able to make those decisions. So you need to know about the concept of unity, how all the different parts of a canvas, all the different parts of a piece of art, and this is one of those elements of design, or excuse me, elements of art and principles of design that I'm talking about. So you need to know that all of these things need to have something cohesive to make the whole finished piece come together in an aesthetically appealing or pleasing way. So if you just do all kinds of random stuff on here that doesn't have any kind of a unifying feature to it, you're going to end up with something that just kind of, I don't know, makes you go, ugh. At least that's what happened to me. Either that or you get so frustrated halfway into it that you just shove it in the closet and you don't even touch it, for a long time. And when you pull it back out, you look at it and, if you're like me, when you've done something like that, you take it and you put it right back in the closet. So I think pretty much by this point, I've gotten those canvases either out of my stash or I've ripped out all that part, frogged, what some people call frogging. And for those of you that are new to that concept too, when you hear somebody say frogging, that means you're ripping it out. It's rip it. So anyway, that's where the term frogging comes from. But when you are just randomly choosing stitches and randomly choosing threads. Threads are not as big a deal as the stitches, I will say. You can do, or I guess you could say, hide a multitude of sins with the thread choice. And you can actually, that brings up another really good point. Anytime you have a canvas, something fun like this, you can actually use just novelty threads and a variety of different threads and make a canvas like this really sing without having to add the very first decorative stitch. So I would suggest, if you're new to choosing stitches for your canvases, that you start with something very small, a piece that doesn't have a lot of shading on it. So that would be actually something like my Santa here. My Santa is a wonderful choice for somebody who would be new to choosing the different stitches for their projects, because see, there's not a whole lot of shading. In fact, I'm not sure, let me look at it. There's not any shading on Santa, so you don't have to worry about that. And the blocks of color are relatively large. Now there are some small areas around his collar and on his cuffs, around the edge of his jacket, but the blocks of color are relatively large, so it would be easier because you're not going to be using as many stitches as you would on something that had a lot more detail on it. So something to keep in mind when you are first getting started is to keep the project small. And anytime you're doing anything new, you want to keep the project small because you want to be able to see the end in sight. You don't want to have this ginormous project that you tackle as the very first thing that you do, because so many times you'll get overwhelmed with the prospect of how long it's going to take to get it finished. And if you're trying to do something new or learn a new skill, then so many times you'll get into it and you'll get overwhelmed or frustrated. But if you have a small project, then you can knock that puppy out really fast. So and then just move on and do another one to get more confidence built up. So again, tips for your very first choosing stitches for your projects would be keep the project small. I would say no bigger than 5 inches by 5 inches. And you would want to make sure that it has blocks of color rather than a lot of shading. Something that can play into it is the size of the canvas mesh. Now, you get better detail on 18 mesh canvas than you do on 13 mesh canvas. However, 13 mesh stitches up faster. So, that's going to be something that your eyes, you have to know how your eyes are going to hold up and what if you have good lighting, if you have a good magnification device, and those are topics for a whole nother conversation, but you want to make sure that you've got yourself set up in the best way to achieve the most success. So you want to have the best tools. You want to have a really good light. or have a spot that you stitch in that has really good natural light. If you need magnification, make sure that you have that, even if it's in the form of those drugstore glasses, you know, the little cheaters that you can get. And yeah, there are anything from that all the way up to yeah, the lamps that have the magnifying glasses built in. I actually have a Dazor lamp that I've had for over 30 years, and it's still working like a charm. I love my Dazor lamp. And then I also have my craft optic glasses that I really love too. So that's another option if you need some better magnification. I wear glasses obviously now, and I can't use the cheaters from the, well, I guess I could, but they don't work as well for me as the craft optics do. And that's actually something that I've purchased very recently. They're not inexpensive, but so it is an investment, but they are super, super helpful for helping you see things. And I think there's, I shouldn't say this. We'll try, I'll look and see, and if there's not a post somewhere on the website or on our Needlepoint TV channel over on YouTube, then I'll make sure that I add that to the list of things that we talk about in a future episode. So those things you need to keep in mind. And then I want to make sure, if I scroll back up through here, if I have any questions that have popped up. So y'all hang tight just a sec. So let me see. We've got so many people here with us. This is wonderful. I love having lots of folks. Let's see. Oh, Leanne's, thank you. I appreciate it. I did get my hair cut. I went to the beauty shop masked up, and the lady that cut my hair had her mask on too, and we were all, you know, everybody was masked up. It was an interesting experience for sure, but thank you. All right, so let's see. I know I saw a couple of questions. Let's see. Let me find them. Hello to everybody. And again, I'm so glad that you're here with me this afternoon. Oh, Harriet, roll tide back at you. Okay. So let's see. All righty. So, oh, Alice, thank you. Alice, love your articles in Needlepoint Now. Thank you. I appreciate that. They're really fun to write. So this next one coming up is another fun one. We've shifted focus on that. I'll just take this down a little bitty tiny rabbit trail. The focus is shifted now toward the different uses that you can have or apply to a single stitch. So this most current issue of Needlepoint Now, the stitch is the crisscross Hungarian stitch. So I included a variety of ways you can use that on a canvas. So we'll be doing it from that perspective going forward. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's see. Here we go. This is what I was looking for. I thought I saw a question. Maureen says, could you give us an example of cohesiveness on the Christmas canvas? So yes, I sure can. So an example of that would be if I'm using, wait a minute, there we go. If I'm working on this Christmas canvas, I want to make sure that if I use stitches, see, you notice how this canvas has diagonal lines on it. This tree has diagonal lines on it. Then I'm going to want to have some type of a stitch that has a diagonal movement to it to convey that, or to carry across that I guess indication is not the right word, but it's the only one that's coming to mind right now, to represent that movement, that diagonal movement. Well, when I'm going to look at this tree right here, what I'm going to want to do is choose a stitch that when it sits when it sits next to this diagonal stitch, it's not going to be jarring. It's going to want to have some similar type movement to it. So perhaps it's a combination stitch. Say, for example, on this, if I used a Byzantine stitch, that's one that looks like stair steps. If you're not real familiar with the different decorative stitches, then some of these names may not mean much to you, but Byzantine stitch is a pretty common stitch. And so it's worked in, like I said, in stair steps, and you can use multiple, you can do 2 by 2 Byzantine, so there'd be 2 stitches across by 2 stitches down by 2 across by 2 down. Or you could use 4 by 4 or 3 by 3. But so say, for example, I used a 3 by 3 on this. So that would mean that the stitch itself is a slanted stitch. So it's a true diagonal. Each individual stitch of the steps is a true diagonal stitch. So those stitches would be, there would be 3 across, and then there would be 3 down. and then there would be 3 across and then 3 down. So like I said, looks like stair steps, but the stitches not only are moving in that diagonal direction, but they also have a slant to them, so that also conveys a diagonal sense of movement. Next to that, on this tree, I could choose a stitch that's not entirely diagonal or slanted. It could have a slanted component to it. So maybe I choose crisscross Hungarian is a perfect example. Maybe I choose to use crisscross Hungarian on this on this tree, because it's got slanted stitches in it, and it does have a sort of diagonal movement or feel to it, but it's not exactly the same as this. And so it's going to play well with it. It's a similar or a related stitch, I guess is the best way to put it. So you would choose a stitch. You want to choose stitches that are somewhat related to one another so that you don't end up with something that's just out of place. And I will be truly honest with you. This is something that takes time to develop. It is a skill that takes time to develop. It's not something that you can just wake up one morning and you've got it down pat. The more you practice this, the better you're going to get at it. And the best suggestion I can give you is, again, start with something small. Choose a canvas that's a little, some of the canvases, the little small round canvases from Lee Designs, and that's Lee. They do those for the little luggage tags. There are little round ornaments that you can do for coin purses, jewelry boxes, all kinds of little small round designs that you can stitch that you can use on in a multitude of ways. Self-finishing, you can have them finished into ornaments, but small pieces. And don't start out trying to do a decorative stitch for every design component on the canvas. Start with 1 or 2, because there's nothing in the world wrong with using a mixture of basket weave and decorative stitches. And I'll be honest with you, every single piece needs to have some basket weave on it, because your eyes have to have a place to rest. Otherwise, you look at something, you know how when you look at, what's a good example? When you look at something, okay, so a Poochie print. You know how those Poochie, they're really pretty and colorful, but can you imagine a Poochie print done in decorative stitches too? All those wild colors and all those different stitches, that would be enough to make your eyeballs pop out of your head. So you have to have some place for your eyes to rest. Your eyes have to have somewhere to go to kind of absorb the rest of what's happening. So there's nothing in the world wrong with it. In fact, I recommend, particularly to the people that I teach inside the Stitchers Club, every single piece needs to have some basket weave on it. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but it does need some. That's my school teacher coming out in me there. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. And Carol says, okay, so the next question Maureen has is, would it be all straight stitches, all diagonal? No, it doesn't have to be. But you do want to have some sort of a transition to help you along. So instead of having a Byzantine stitch next to a Parisian stitch, which is a strictly up and down stitch, not going to say that it's not going to work, but it's not going to be as effective as something that were more similar. Excuse me. So you do want to find things that are going to play well together. Is the way I approach things. Now, there are probably other people out there in the world who have successfully done things a different way, but this is the way that I teach how to choose stitches and threads for your projects, and it's how I come up with the different looks that I come up with for the pieces that I choose or design stitch guides for. So, all right. Let's see. Do you really get? Okay. Elise, reach out to me after this is over. That's a good question. So let's see. Janice says, if you were shading, why wouldn't you use the same stitch or revert to basket weave for small shading areas? You definitely would. You could use, if you were shading something, if you had a piece that had some shading on it and you wanted to make sure that you captured that shading, you could use a stitch like interlocking Gobelin stitch. And then you could use a technique called needle painting, which is where you actually use different colors or shades of thread in the needle. Maybe you have red, but you have 3 or 4 shades of red, and to convey that shading that the artist painted on the canvas, then what you do is you alter the number of strands of thread that you have in the needle, going, say, for example, from 4 strands of red to bright red to 3 strands of bright red and 1 strand of medium red, and then you keep working your way through until you get all the way through to the dark red. So that would be a way that you could definitely do that. And you could do that with basket weave, or you could do that with a stitch like interlocking gobelin. That's a really good one for shading. You could also use other decorative stitches, but that's just one that I'm thinking off the top of my head would be really good for shading. You could also use a long and short stitch. Split encroached gobelin would work. So there are a lot of different ones that you could use for shading for sure. So Janice, I'll have to share my glasses with y'all in another time because I don't have them handy, but I will definitely make sure that I make a note to do that for you. Okay, so Maureen, what would you do? Let's see, what would you do then with the middle red tree, which is not diagonal? So, okay, so back here, so if I were to do, get this held up. So if I were to do a Byzantine stitch here and a crisscross Hungarian stitch here, a crisscross Hungarian stitch has slanted stitches, but it also has a cross stitch in it. So it's a little, like a little X, just a standard cross stitch. So you could do something like an upright cross here, or you could do a Smyrna cross, something that has that cross stitch component to it, or that crossed stitch. It doesn't have to be a true cross stitch. It could be something, I'm trying to think what's another one that's a crossed stitch. Okay, of course I'm not going to be able to think of one just off the top of my head. An oblong cross stitch. So it doesn't look, it's not like an X or an upright, you know, like a plus sign. It's elongated, so it's still crossed. So it has that, what do you call it, relationship to the crisscross Hungarian stitch, but it's not truly an upright cross stitch that, or an X that looks exactly like the X in the crisscross Hungarian stitch. Okay, so Debbie, would you be safe if you kept all the stitches within the same stitch family? Yeah, you would. You have to throw in a little bit of something to jazz things up though, so you don't end up with too much of the same, because while unity is important, you will have a focal point on your canvas. So the focal point is where you can choose to do all kinds of special things to make that particular design component stand out, because that's where you truly want the viewer of your finished piece to look first. That's where all the attention goes. So, yeah, that would be a perfect example would be to use stitches that were all from the same family, but then use something different for the focal point. So, all right. So, good deal, Maureen. I'm so glad that that makes more sense. That's perfect. That makes me happy to know. All right, and Carol says, how do you decide which color and stitches to begin with? So, Carol, I would say you're going to use the same principle that you use on stitching any other canvas, and you're going to want to use your lighter colors first, and then, and of course, some of that is it's going to be different for every single canvas. But if you start with, with that in mind, now, of course, on this, the trees, you have these fancy things on the trees, the decorations on the trees. So quite frankly, I would stitch like the tree itself, and then come back and do the little doodads on top afterwards, because they're going to be on for example, here, I would couch that curly line down with a pretty white sparkly thread. And I might actually do beads on some of these. So what you always want to do, and that's a very good question, it brings up a really good point, you always want to make sure that before you actually put the first stitch in your canvas that you make photocopies of your canvas. Make a couple of photocopies in color and a couple of photocopies in black and white. And don't draw or write on one of the color photocopies, because you're going to want to have that as your guide to go by what the original canvas looked like. You can draw and write all over one of them, but make sure you keep the other one pristine, because you want to be able to see. For example, if I stitched on this tree, let me find it. There it is. If I stitched this tree, wait a minute, there we go. Wait, my fingers, I'm looking backwards. So, all right, so if I stitch this tree in a decorative stitch, I would likely stitch over those design components, those fancy little swirly things, and then I would use my photograph to go back and for placement. That's not necessarily something I would recommend for somebody who's brand new to needlepoint, but it's what I would do. So that's that's the reason you want to have that copy of your canvas, that photocopy of your canvas to refer back to. So let's see. All right, wait. My thing started going fast. Well, let me scroll back up here. Oh, Susan, thank you for sharing the Craft Optics link. I appreciate that. So let's see. All right, so I think I got those questions answered. And then, so Carol, what would be the focal point on those trees? In this case, it's going to be the tree in the middle. Wait, there we go. That tree, the tree in the middle. And that's there is inside of the Stitchers Club, there is a unit on the focal point. So that video that's inside the Stitchers Club is a really good help to share with you or tells you how to be able to identify the focal point on a canvas. So if you hadn't watched that, or if it's been a while, that would be a great review for you. So I would suggest that you do that because I know you're one of our members. So, all right. So let's see. Wait a minute. Dana says, for the Christmas tree canvas, would you stitch the light snow at the bottom first or do the trees? I didn't even look at that. Yeah, you would. I would probably do the snow at the bottom. Quite, because y'all know my story, or some of you do know my story about the snowman canvas. After I stitched the snowman, the whole body, well, I stitched the dark features first, and then I stitched the snowman's body with white chronic. And when I did his little orange nose, I ended up having a halo around it because I pulled some of those little twiddles of thread through. Even though I had buried the tails really, really well, there were a few that escaped, and it created a halo around his nose. So his nose had sort of a peach-colored halo around it. So I always like to stitch the white things first, except for in the case of something like this where I'm going to come back and stitch on top or do some type of fancy something on top. All right. Okie dokie. So I think that pretty much wraps up what I was going to share with y'all today. If you haven't had a chance to check out the Serendipity Needleworks website, I'm going to copy and paste the link to this week's blog post. It's definitely a good one to read and be able to get your feet wet on the to beginning to choose stitches and threads for your projects. And if you're if you're a weekly subscriber to the emails that I send out every week, then there was a link in there for you to be able to click on it and download what I call my it's a guide. It's not I call it a stitch guide, but it's not really. It's more like a master plan worksheet. Or a stitch guide worksheet. So you can click on that and you can print out that worksheet, and you can print out as many as you want, and you can use it to help you planning different canvases or different projects that you want to work on in the coming weeks and months, because it gives you a place to write out or list out all the different design components and then potential threads and potential stitches and stuff like that. So, and if you don't get the weekly emails, then you need to go over to the Serendipity Needleworks website, and let me pop up. This is where you can actually sign up to get the weekly emails, because I always try to include a little something extra for people who are weekly subscribers. So that wraps it up for today. I appreciate you being here with me this afternoon. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And for those of you joining me for the Fabulous Flowers Workshop on Saturday, I'll see you there. Have a great rest of your day, and until next time, happy stitching. Bye for now.